So as a development NGO, we analyze TTIP as the next big thing in global trade policy, so as it aims at establishing global standards and global trade rules, setting precedents and take it or leave it kind of rules that will be then imposed on developing countries. This is why we are engaging as a development NGO in this debate. We often hear from the EU and US officials that people who are critical of TTIP are misinformed, so we are trying to inform ourselves better by listening to statements from the EU and the US side and reading the text, at least those that are available, and even though most of them are outdated and would like sometimes, from time to time, to see consolidated text to be able to be more on the latest information available. The problem is with the TTIP debate that we get signals from the two negotiating parties and sometimes mixed signals. So we thought how to make the best use of this stakeholders' public relations exercise day and the fact that we have negotiators from both sides in the same room. And so we thought we could try to get to the bottom of some of those contradictory messages that we get. First, on ISDS and ICS, I think we don't need to go again into the very detailed analysis that we've heard from TACD, Greenpeace and others, many others here and outside of this room. We share those concerns, and we do still believe that ICS is definitely not the end of the story, at least on the EU side. It's just a step towards the end of ISDS and ICS as democratic and acceptable systems. For instance, you may know that you are currently sitting in the region of Brussels, which has its very own parliament, a parliament that will have ratification power over TTIP. And this parliament voted a resolution last year which clearly says that they don't want any kind of dispute settlement mechanisms between investors and states in TTIP. So my first question would be, will you listen to this democratic voice of this parliament that doesn't want, that wants to be able to pass laws without the constant threat of multi-million euros arbitration upon it? If I had more time, of course, I would be happy to go deeper into the analysis, but the general idea is that ICS and ISDS are deeply biased and unacceptable in democratic systems. Just maybe to conclude the discussion that was going on before with Greenpeace, actually looked up the ICS text, and you can see there indeed that judges shall refrain from acting as counsel in any pending and new investment protection dispute under this or any other treaty or domestic law. Counsel, so they can still be arbitrators in other ongoing cases, and so that's still for us a problem of conflict of interest. So the reaction of the US side has not been very positive on this new ICS proposal. So we have the EU that are defending ICS for now, the US that doesn't like ICS, and the vast majority of civil society that says that both ICS and ISDS are unacceptable. So my question to you would be, how do you sort that out? Is the US willing to listen to the people and the democratic institution in the US and the EU who oppose that system? Very shortly on several other points on services. Why do you think Germany felt that it was needed to exclude its social security system from the CETA services liberalization chapter in its specific national negative list? Of course, this is not TTIP, but for us this is closely related. Was the national social security system of Germany threatened by CETA? Is it still threatened by CETA in other countries other than Germany that didn't put this exception in the list? And is it threatened by TTIP? The resolution of the Walloon Parliament, another parliament that will have ratification of power over CETA and TTIP, put explicitly that they refuse any kind of negative list approach. So they ask for in TTIP for full positive list approach, not a hybrid one. And again, then we will need a broad public debate on what is in that positive list, but as an approach, negative list is for us, again, a problem. Will you listen to that democratic voice? And maybe a last point on transparency. We always hear EU officials tell us that this is the most transparent negotiation of all time, and this is sadly true. And it tells a lot about all the other negotiations that have been going on in the past and are still going on today. Where is the mandate of the EU-Tunisia DCFTA negotiations? Where is the public debate on the EU-Mexico new mandate that is apparently being discussed right now and we know nothing about? On the other hand, we have, and I will conclude by that, we have US officials that tell us that they will just do as they always did, only share parts of the negotiation text with a limited number of interest groups, most of which are big business representatives. So again, how do we bridge that gap, and how do we listen to the demands of European and American civil societies? I have, of course, much more to say, and we have a 40 pages analysis paper that was just translated into English, so I would be happy to share that if you want to understand better our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Any answers to my question?
Thank you for your statement, and of course we're always happy to we have, which is public, by the way, thanks to the Commission.
14 months after the start of the negotiations.
Of course, the Commission has published, as you know, the communication, the new Trade for All, where we really would like to make every single mandate public, and we encourage the Council to do so. Finally, after a long pressure from the Commission, the Council agreed to do so. But anyway, I don't want to separate responsibilities. We are the EU, so absolutely we need more transparency on that. But the fact that there's a ratification power of the agreement, nobody takes that away. If the Walloon Parliament will decide that this agreement is not good enough, it will vote no. So there's no, we have a lot of resolutions. We are in particular listening to the resolution of the European Parliament of July. We're doing our best to keep that mandate, the mandate, the resolutions, the dialogue. Our commissioner and our high senior officials actually went to the Walloon Parliament and to discuss and to hear what the concerns are. But I mean, the ratification power stays there, and nobody is trying to take that away. I mean, the ISDS, there will be plenty of things that have been said. This is completely non-democratic. The question for us is, I mean, what is more democratic about the International Court of Justice or the European Court of Human Rights as compared to a new system or a new court system that we are proposing? Why is one acceptable, democratic, the other not democratic, for instance? This is just one question.
Quickly, on ratification power, we believe it is deeply undemocratic to have a whole negotiation process where apparently you don't take into account those resolutions and you just present at the end 1,000, 2,000 pages agreement that is take it or leave it to that parliament. And if they don't agree, they will have to balance between what they asked during the negotiations and, well, not all our elements have been accepted, but, well, we don't have a choice, we cannot amend this, we just have to accept it. We think that is not democratic and it would never be accepted in any other framework of other legislative activity of a parliament. Second, on ICS, well, the general thing is that the main difference between ICS, ISDS, and those other examples that you gave is this one-way street, is that it's only investors, international investors who get extra rights, and states who get extra obligations under that new system. So there is a fundamental incentive for arbitrators, or call it then judges if you want. Apparently the Association of Judges disagrees with that. There is an incentive for them to keep investors winning cases, because investors are the only one who can bring claims and can keep the system alive and can keep the job of those judges alive.
But they lose a lot of cases. They lose most cases.
No, they won 60%. UNCTAD clearly stated that 60% of cases are in the end in the favor of investors over states. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The main problem is regulatory chill, and these testimonies we have from lobbyists and from government officials, both saying the simple threat in a hallway, it doesn't have to be public, the simple threat of an ISDS or ICS case has already been efficient in killing projects of general interest laws. It does happen, and we have government officials who say it happens.
Doesn't happen. Give me the example.
We have quotes from officials from Canada, from lobbyists, from the mining industry who say, the lobbyists say, we used it and it worked and it changed the behavior of government in certain cases, just the threat. And we have government officials from Canada saying, we receive thousands of lawyer letters every time we wanted to regulate on environment, for instance, and most of those laws never reached the public, never reached the parliament. They were killed before we could have any public debate because of those lawsuits threats. So regulatory chill is something real, and it's way worse than those 700 cases, which are, again, just the tip of the iceberg.
I mean, on this, I have to say, whether Canada or the European Union, if you think that the European Union, as we heard earlier from the colleague, is the main user, and European Union countries actually invented the system of investment protection, has the highest standards of environmental protection in the world. Nobody can deny that. So how that how can you put that together with the fact that there's been regulatory chill? I don't see it. I don't see it.
It would be much higher without it, of course. And again, we have the case of Vattenfall. We have other cases where clearly existing cases and settlements, amicable settlements based on ICS cases have weakened regulations. And again, those are just the visible part. And there's just no way of knowing how many times a lawsuit has been just threatened in a lobby meeting with an official. We just don't know. But we can see how many laws have been put on the table. We can talk about chemicals, endocrine perturbators, we can talk about GMOs, we can talk about all those things where there could have been better regulation in the EU, and it has been weakened and watered down. And of course, SDS is just a part of the puzzle, but it played a role.
I believe this discussion is not finished, but we need to move on to the next speaker. Thank you very much for your presentation. And Isabelle Weiler from Eurotext will now speak on the European textile and apparel sector's view on the dairy amendment.